All right, friends. Well, I am so excited to be with you. Reboot Your Worship is something that I have done twice a year, getting ready for Advent and Lent for several years now. Now, when Advent Christmas got over this year, all of a sudden we turned the corner and hello, Lent is right on our heels. It starts February 14th, Valentine's Day, kind of bizarre, right? And then Easter is on April Fool's Day. What a year. But it's just so close, it's so soon that doing a 6-week webinar series that I usually do is going to get us right up to Lent. And I just wanted to be able to equip you and get you ready for Lent earlier than taking the whole 6 weeks. So what I did is I have distilled this down to 2 weeks. We're going to get some of those reboot basics in there. But I decided to ask myself this question. If I could give you 2 bottom rock solid principles that I use that are important to me, that are my criteria for when I design worship, what would those 2 things be? And so basically I've gone from 5 basics that I usually do in 6 weeks of the reboot down to 2 principles, and we're going to have the first one today and the second one next week. Those 5 basics actually were create worship series. All right, we're going to talk about that today. Engage the congregation. Participatory worship is liturgy, right? Liturgy literally means the work of the people. And so for me, it's not worship, it's not liturgy unless we are engaging the congregation actively in their participation. Because I believe that worship forms and shapes us. And so if we are active in our worship, if we understand that we are all part of the body of Christ, that it's not just the professionals who do it all, that we will, as disciples, go out into the world and know that we are to be participants in making the world a better place. So I think it directly correlates our active participation in worship and being active disciples in the world. So engage the congregation is my second basic. Being sensory rich is my third basic. And if you've been on my Reboot Your Worship webinars before, or if you've come to any one of my workshops or read my latest book called Think Like a Filmmaker, you know that I believe that sensory rich worship is not just about having the latest bells and whistles. It's about communicating effectively, because all of us communicate in different ways. And so some of us are going to be more focused on the words, but for some of us, it's the music where we're going to get the message. For some of us, it's the visuals and the space that's going to help draw us into the story. So there are so many different reasons why we need to be sensory rich. And it's not just because it's the latest, grooviest thing. It's because we have learned through cognitive science that our best communication comes when we are sensory rich. So we will be talking about some of that in our 2 weeks as well. Deeply spiritual leadership. This is key. We can be as creative as we want to be, but if our leadership is didactic, if it's perfunctory, if it's just stand and turn to hymn number, blah, 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 we're missing a great opportunity for worship to be more like a spiritual journey and less like the agenda of a business meeting. I'm very, very interested in that. And also, we need to let it flow. Worship that flows is also going to feel more like a spiritual journey than an agenda to a business meeting. So we're going to hear about this. I've distilled these 5 basics I usually do in 6 weeks down to 2 principles. And those 2 principles are deep structure and spiritual depth. So that's what we're going to be doing in these 2 weeks. Today, we're going to deal with number 1, deep structure. So creativity is not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. All right. Creativity needs structure. Now, I spent 5 years on the road with the Dave Brubeck Jazz Quartet. And when I was with that show, we would also do master classes. And Dave and I would talk about the marriage of structure and improvisation. You can't have improvisation without structure, right? And so having a deep structure helps us to create the container in which the word will be proclaimed. It's about having both repetition and new discoveries. And the repetition is kind of the oh yeah, right? It's the things that we've done that help us know who we are. It's those things that help us feel like we're home because we recognize something, right? It draws us back time and time again. But if all we had was repetition without innovation or new discoveries, it becomes rote. So along with repetition, we need those new discoveries. We need the aha. So we need both the oh yeah and the aha, right? So the aha are those things that help us to think about the word proclaimed in ways we never thought about it before. And that also will keep us coming back. It keeps us on the edge of our seats. It keeps us alert. It keeps us coming back to that story, because there are stories, faith narratives that, every year we come back to those same stories, but how will we hear them in a way that we've never heard them before? That is also a part of having deep structure. So when you get good structure, my friends, the design process becomes incredibly freeing. So it may feel overwhelming at first to think about doing sensory-rich worship. It may feel like you're juggling lots of things, but once you get the structure for the series and you say, this is the container that we're going to do week in and week out during this series this year, then it can all come together quite easily. I don't know, some of you may have seen my Facebook Live post the other day when we launched my newest Lent series called Listen. And I had just gotten some of the finishing touches on it. And I did this Facebook Live where I played the Pointer Sisters. I'm so excited. Which was the opposite of the tone of the series, but it was how I was feeling at the moment. And I was dancing around the living room, and I just wanted to share it with people, so I was dancing around. And this is what I want you to feel. I want you to feel like you are so excited for the series, the Lent series, to start, because you've been working on something where it's going to be such a rich journey, and you get really excited about it rather than stressed out about it. So that is my main goal in life, is to help you get excited about worship design and leadership and less stressed out about it. So let's hope we can, in these 2 webinars, really get you excited for Lent. All right, so the other thing that deep structure does is that the congregation feels like they're being held in a container in which it is safe to go deep. So this is what we're going to be talking about this week, this deep structure. When we have something we know we can count on, when it feels like we're on a journey with others, it feels safer to go deeper into our spiritual lives. All right, my slide jumped around. Let me go back. Okay, so the second thing, and what we'll do next week, is the principle of spiritual depth. Don Salyers is a mentor of mine, a wonderful liturgical theologian, and he uses this phrase, worship with deep soul. And ever since I heard that, I've been fascinated with this idea that worship can either have deep soul or not. I mean, frankly, we've all experienced worship that kind of felt like we were going through the motions. And then we've experienced worship where we feel like, wow, we connected in a way that was much deeper than perhaps we had in the past. And that's what I'm really interested in doing. We have, as humans, I think, a deep need for connection with God, with the narrative of our faith, with each other. Worship must do more than simply go through the motions. Can I get an amen in the chat box on that one? So there's a role that design plays in that as we plan for Lent worship, and a role that leadership has as we then bring that worship to the people. All right, so let's get started on deep structure, my friends. If you are a part of the Worship Design Studio, I'd love for you to put in the chat box if you are a year-long member of the Worship Design Studio or have been. You know that we have lots of series. We have 60 plus series in the Worship Design Studio. 14 of them I did specifically around Lent. I've been doing this for a long time. And 3 of those are fully scripted. 3 years ago, I began to create series. And of those 60 plus series in the Worship Design Studio, we give you ideas for every Sunday for every series, but we don't necessarily put them together in an order of worship. But 3 years ago, I decided to start putting them together in in orders of worship. And what this does is it helps you, if you've never done sensory-rich worship before, it helps you with a step-by-step. It's right there on the page for you. Of course, you can tweak it, adapt it to your setting, but it does help you see what that actually looks like. And so I'm going to be using those 3 fully scripted series as examples in this webinar so that you can get a better idea of how to put these things together, how to structure a sensory-rich worship that takes us deep. Those 3 series that we'll be using as examples, and if you already looked at our reading materials for today, you know what those are, but let me just tell you, it's Gifts of the Dark Wood, which was 3 years ago, based on a wonderful book by my friend Eric Elnes. And that one really is about the Lent journey of accepting the fact that life is hard sometimes. That we will be in situations that we kind of are uncomfortable with. We can feel lost. We can feel uncertain. We can feel grief. We can feel all of those things. And Eric, in his book, Gifts of the Dark Wood, says that there are gifts to be found there. So rather than trying to get out of those situations as fast as possible, denying that the bad stuff isn't happening, to embrace it and see what the Spirit is telling us in the midst of that. And so Gifts of the Dark Wood, many congregations have done this series, and I still get people at workshops saying, oh my gosh, my congregation just had an incredible journey with Gifts of the Dark Wood. So that's one that we'll use as an example. Then the next year I did a Lent series called Roll Down Justice. And Gifts of the Dark Wood was kind of a personal journey. So the next year I wanted to do a journey that connected our baptismal rituals with justice making. Now, Lent was originally, and we've forgotten this, most of us, was originally designed, created, developed in order to prepare catechumens for their baptism on Easter Eve. And so really that's how the Lent season developed. Now, in the 11th century, Ash Wednesday was included, and by that time it really had become more of a penitential season. But I'm here to tell you that its roots are in baptism, not necessarily just the penitential kind of feel. And so we can, in Lent, we can connect deeply with our baptism. And I wanted to create a series that would do that. And so Roll Down Justice, every week we connect to parts of our baptismal rituals that remind us that we are empowered as disciples, as those who have died and reborn with Christ already. Death has no sting. There is nothing to fear, that we are to be bold in creating a better world. Now, there's no composer that I know that does this better musically than Mark Miller. And Mark Miller came out with a songbook called Roll Down Justice. And so I highlighted songs. There's a feature song every week in that one. And it really, from claiming ourselves as beloved of God, just as the voice of God said to Jesus at his baptism, you are my beloved. When we really understand ourselves to be beloved, then we see others as beloved as well. And that is the first step in right relationship, in justice. And so it goes on through the baptismal rituals and reminds us that we are called. So that's one that is churches really had a great time with this. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about one of the things that they loved about this series when we get down to anchor images. All right, so listen is the third example that I'm using in these 2 webinars. And this is the one I just got finished with. This is my 2018 Lent series. And really, listen is about hearing that still small voice, getting quiet enough in the midst of the noise and the chaos of the world. Can I get an amen on that one as well? In the midst of the noise and the chaos of the world, how can we get still enough to connect with that deep wisdom within us that is the still small voice of God, but also our true self, who God created us to be? And that takes some practices, some spiritual practices. So this series is really going to focus on spiritual practices, getting quiet, meditating on scripture, prayer, And so this is Lent is a perfect time to do this, to introduce perhaps silence. Some of us, many churches, and I've been at many churches consulting, many churches don't have very much or at all silence in their worship. And so this series is going to feature some moments of silence. And I tell people in this series, if you haven't done silence before, don't start with 1 minute. Oh my gosh, 1 minute's a very long time. Start with 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and then ease your way up to longer and longer practices of silence. You know, especially North American cultures don't do silence very well. We don't get big points for getting quiet, for being quiet, for taking time for ourselves. And Lent is a time when the theological focus itself urges us to slow it down. Right? Really, that's what giving something up is about. It's not really about, for me anyway, I will say, that giving something up in Lent is less about kind of punishment for sins, right? Or feeling the sting of not having chocolate or whatever it is that you give up. But giving something up in Lent is about making room. This is much more an Eastern Christian kind of philosophy. And that is that when you take something away, it creates more space, more room for us. And that's really what I'm interested in Lent, is seeing that, letting go of some of the extraneous noise and making more room to listen. So that's what the third one is about. So you can get to and find out more about all of those by going to worshipdesignstudio.com and then /gifts or /roll down justice or /listen. And you can find out much more about that. Stay tuned to the end of the webinar, because I'm going to give you a promo code to get 20% off of any one of these series a la carte, so that you can really, if you've never done one of our series before, or you've never been part of the Worship Design Studio, or never studied with me, you can get a really great idea of how we create a deeply spiritual season of worship. Okay, so the first, I sent you in the email 3 documents, and the first one of those is called Why Create in Worship Series. Now remember, our first principle is about deep structure, and so one of the most important things I think about structure is creating worship series rather than one-hit wonders. Now, the lectionary came along with the liturgical renewal movement, the mid-20th century, and I think it's a wonderful gift. And I do have series in the Worship Design Studio that are based on the lectionary. But if we just say, oh, I've got the lectionary, so that's my structure, and I'm just going to look at the lectionary week to week to week and preach whatever, design whatever based on that week, and I don't look at the season as a whole, to create a series, an overarching message that would hold it all together, then I think we lose out on some really great benefits of looking at a whole season as a series. Now this, I started this work 25 years ago. So now these days, there are enough of us teaching out there about the benefits of series that many of you are already doing that. But let's just take a look at some of the high points about why it is that series are a good idea, especially in terms of a spiritual journey. So it creates intentional communal spiritual journeys. In other words, it's, through your through all of your worship arts, through your publicity, call it evangelism, call it publicity, it doesn't matter, getting the word out, you give people a focus and say, this year we're going to focus in on this topic. And we're going to go deep into it. We're going to go every Sunday, we're going to go in a different direction or in deeper direction. That creates a cohesive whole for a spiritual journey. It also helps us to remember and reinforce messages over time, right? So we know that in the science of memory, repetition is great. It helps us to continue to dive deeper. So books have chapters, right? That's the way that we get more and more out of the subject title of the book, is that each chapter has a title and we get deeper and deeper into it. So a series works in much the same way. It is a container for the familiar and the new that we just talked about in terms of structure. We need that familiar, those things that repeat, but we also need the new. So if the overarching structure is kind of an interesting new way to think about something. Like Gifts of the Dark Wood, right? We're going to get this image of being in a dark wood where we're not sure where the path is going. And we're going to see what God has to say to us in that context, right? It gives us something new to frame it with. But within that, we're going to make sure that we have some things that repeat so it feels like a familiar journey along the way. It also helps the worship team not get burned out doing creative worship. Okay, let's just get real here. The sensory-rich kind of worship that I'm talking about, where the visual, the media, the music, the dramatic arts, the ritual action, the verbal arts, the sermon, the words, all of that connect. If you try to do that on a different subject every week, it is just not going to happen. It may happen for a little while, but you can't sustain it, right? You can't sustain that. So if you do a series, then you have that overarching theme. You can have music that is your theme song that repeats. You can have a visual installation that is beautiful, that you spent time on, but it doesn't have to change every week. You can keep it the same, or it just tweaks a little bit. So it is really going to help the worship team focus their efforts and, get to worship as well, rather than just running around and being stressed out week after week. Yes, amen. And finally, a worship series can act as an on-ramp for visitors. So gone are the days when people just say, I haven't been to church for the last 10 years. I think I'll get up and go this morning, right? People go if they have a reason to go. And if you are letting people know early enough what you're doing, you make a vinyl sign up front so people driving by can see it. You have it on your Facebook page. You have it on your website. If people can see what's coming up, they might go, oh, wow. Yeah, you know what? My life feels pretty chaotic and pretty noisy. Let me go see what this 6-week thing is about listen. I need some quieter time in my life. I feel like I'm just on the hamster wheel. So perhaps they're shopping around for churches. That's the way, websites, that's the way people shop for churches now. If you have a series trailer, which we're going to talk about in a moment, if you have a description, a synopsis that we're going to talk about in a moment, then people are more likely to have a reason to come. So it can be an on-ramp for visitors. Okay, so there's so many great ideas why we would create worship series. And of course, in my 6-week reboot, we would spend an entire week just on this. But suffice it to say that this is one of the most important first steps in creating a deep structure that becomes the container for a safe space for our spiritual journeys. All right, so I want to invite you, when this webinar is over, as soon as it's over, I want to invite you to go to worshipdesignstudio.com/listen. And on that page, you're going to see what we call a series trailer, right? Movie trailer. I get this from movies, right? I wrote this book called Think Like a Filmmaker, and I learned all kinds of great things from filmmakers about storytelling in sensory-rich ways. And one of the things that's very, very important is offering the public a way to see what the movie is about, offer the feel, the ethos, so that it can appeal to those people who are looking for a story of that kind. And so I began to make series trailers as part of getting the word out. So I want you to go to that link, /listen, worshipdesignstudio.com/listen. Watch the video there. And I want to tell you that I made that right on my computer with the software that came with my computer. All right. I used free pictures from unsplash.com. I used music that Chuck Bell and I had composed for the series. So, I don't have to get anybody's permission. I have to get my permission to use it, right? But if you use one of our series, you have permission to actually use the series trailer, because what you're going to see in that trailer is the way that we are getting the word out about the series. But when you actually purchase the series, we're giving you that video with blank spaces for you to put your church's information on that. We are so committed to helping you get the word out that this is one of the ways that we can do that. But what I want to stress here is that one of the ways that you can get the word out to your people, get them excited, get the anticipation going, but also to other people who might come, is by creating this series trailer. Now, when you look at that trailer, you're going to see some words that are the synopsis. All right, so the synopsis, I've got it on the slide right now. It says this: have you ever misplaced your phone, which is on vibrate, of course, right? I almost always have my phone on vibrate because I don't want it to disrupt. But then I lay it down and I don't know where the heck I put it. So you say, and of course, it's on vibrate, and then you ask somebody to call it, right? So we get really still and really quiet. So like I go like this. Because my attention goes all directions because I don't know where it is. I know it's around here somewhere. It's probably underneath a pile of papers or wherever, but I get really still and quiet. And yet I am on high alert, right? Have you done that? Have you done that? Okay, so you know that feeling. So I go on to say, we get really still and really quiet. Our ears perk up in all directions in order to be ready to hear that little buzz. It's a quieting down and heightening attention already, right at the same time. High alert. This Lent, we will quiet things down and heighten our attention to the still small voice of God and our own true self. Listening through prayer as well as meditation on holy texts is an ancient Lenten practice. Come and rest. Come and listen. Now that come and rest, come and listen at the end is a reference to the song that you will hear in that series trailer, and also which is our theme song, right? Chuck Bell and I write these little refrains. I'm not a hymn writer, I'm not a songwriter, but I can write these little refrains, right? And the little refrains are repetitious so that we can use them as kind of theme songs at the beginning of worship. So when you watch that trailer, you're gonna get a sense of that. But that is a synopsis. All right, so our second article that I sent you for this webinar is called Writing Synopses as You Develop Themes. If you haven't read those yet, that's fine. Just go back and read them after the webinar. It's really going to add to what I'm saying here. That article is going to tell you kind of the thoughts that I have as I write these little synopses. Now, this also came from filmmakers who, screenwriters write what's called log lines. And so besides the series trailer, when I go to my app on my phone to see what movie I want to go see, there's going to be a little description of it. This is a really great habit to get into, worship designers, is writing these little synopses. This is something I do at the beginning of my design process. And when I can do that, when I can crystallize that message, then it helps my worship team who's going to help me design. It helps my visual artists, my musicians who are going to be choosing anthems and songs and whatever, hymns. It's going to help everybody know kind of what the journey is that we're on. Okay, let's take a look at a couple more synopses from the other two example series. So Gifts of the Dark Wood. This series, based on the book by the same name by Eric Elnes, is about seeing life through new eyes, recognizing that experiences of failure, emptiness, and uncertainty are as critical for finding our way through life as they are unavoidable. Now, that's a quote from Eric's book. So if you're designing a series on a book, based on a book that you're going to be following, maybe you're doing a small group study, which is exactly what you can do with Gifts of the Dark Wood, then pulling out something from the introduction or even something from the back cover. That's how people get the word out about books too, right? So using that as part of the synopsis is a way. So I go on to say, we will see how experiences of life through the dark wood are actually clues to our calling and life path. How can the struggles of life be the seedbed of spiritual awakening to the fullness of life, right? So we see right away, this is the journey that we are on. The Roll Down Justice one says, Lent is a time of reminding ourselves who we are called to be in this world. Our Lenten series is inspired by Amos, a prophet whose message is that God calls us to let justice roll down like waters. Worship without justice is not acceptable. Rather, our songs must move us to action on behalf of the oppressed. Through the powerful music of Mark Miller and the remembrance of our rituals of baptism, which is the origins of Lent, this season will offer us reflection and renewed inspiration to let our voices be tuned to the heart of the gospel, proclaiming God's love for all people. So you see, it's a very different kind of feel for a series, but perfect for some congregations that really need to take this journey into how are we called to make this world a better place. And you can see that in that synopsis. So the first purpose that I write a synopsis for at the very beginning of my design process is so that I can, as a visionary, I call the pastor, the main preacher, the visionary. I, as a visionary, can cast the vision to my team and help them to see what it is that we're going to be doing for this season. What that does is that means that everybody's contributions on the team then, if you're working as a team, which I highly recommend, everybody's contributions can be more on point, right? Because they know where you're going. So this suggestion for an anthem will be right on point because they know where you're going with that Sunday. Now, I also, and we're going to talk in just a moment, I also create synopses then for every Sunday in the series, or every frame, I call it, in the series. We'll get to that in a moment when we talk about frames. So let me just pause right here. And Jenna, if you could let me know, do we have any questions about why do we create worship series, and about this synopsis writing?
Yeah, a couple of questions. Yeah, just came in.
Okay.
Deb asked, do you have a general idea of the length of sermon series? I see a lot of 6-week series. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, great question. Well, generally a series that goes with a liturgical season is going to follow that length, right? So Advent, Christmas for me is 4 Sundays of Advent, Christmas Eve, and then the Sunday after Christmas. And Christmas Eve might have a couple of different ones, right? Lent is always for me Ash Wednesday, the 6 Sundays of Lent, and then a Holy Week service. I like to put Easter in the Easter season series, right? So Easter is the beginning of a new series. Easter is kind of the end of Holy Week, but it's also the beginning of the Easter season, which is 7 weeks, right? So Easter plus 7 weeks all the way through Pentecost. So that one's going to be an 8-week series. Now, when you get to ordinary time, you get to choose. Right? So I generally, in ordinary time, I've done everything from 3. I think anything less than 3 is not really a series. 2 in a row, maybe so. But 3, I think, is a good amount of time. It's the magic number. It's the Trinity. So I generally don't do anything less than 3. And then I have done some series that are as long as 9 or 10 Sundays long. But that has to be a subject that you can really have many entry points into to get that many. So that's a rare occurrence, but we do have a couple of series in the Worship Design Studio that are that long, like a summer series that you might do over a couple of months in the summer, that kind of thing. Great. What other questions?
Kathy asked, how does this work for lectionary series? Same principles as well?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So when I talk about series, it's not antithetical to lectionary preaching. In the Worship Design Studio, when I create series based on the lectionary, I am sitting down and I'm studying the text and I'm looking for those threads throughout. And so I often will do my study rather than looking at all 4 readings one Sunday at a time. I will instead read all of the Hebrew lections for the whole series, all of the Psalms, all of the epistles, and all of the Gospels for the whole series, because you're more likely to find threads of thought. This is the way the lectionary was compiled. And it's also based on the liturgical year. So you will find, I have brainstorming webinars, podcasts with guest experts from all over the country in the Worship Design Studio about every season for all 3 lectionary cycles. And every time we would brainstorm, we would find at least 10 to 20 different lens that you could use for that lectionary cycle. And it's a lot of fun to do that. And I also think it makes using the lectionary, it sort of holds it together. And when you come back around 3 years and you've got the same text, then you can look at it from a different angle. All right, Jenna, any other questions?
Yes, we have quite a few still.
Okay.
There's two that might go together, so I'll tell you
Okay.
these together. Kathy asked any suggestions for how the visionary can best cast the vision so others can climb aboard. And
Yes.
Daniel asked, what are some exercises to help get brainstorming going for a worship team?
Ooh, oh my gosh. Okay, so those are big questions and could take an entire different webinar, but here's what I'm going to do. This is kind of cheating, but because I have other things to move on to, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get Think Like a Filmmaker, Sensory-Rich Worship Design for Unforgettable Messages, my book that came out, because I really took a long time to talk about step by step. How do you do this as the visionary? How do you cast the vision? Now, I will tell you that I do it in a brainstorming party. So this is why Jenna is saying these two questions kind of go together. So I love a brainstorming party. And this is where you are going to, as a visionary, come to your folks with your synopses of the whole series. But then I also like to have a synopsis written for every week. And I send that out to the team. Then we come together in a brainstorming party. And I will create a little worship moment. I'll put on some music, play some music that is the feel of the series that I'm hoping. Like Listen would be a very meditative kind of thing. I might read some scripture that I feel is at the core of that message. I might read a poem. I might have some slides that have some photos that have to do with the anchor image, which I'm about to talk about. So I would create a little mini experience to immerse, this is the important thing, immerse the team in the feel, get them excited about where we're going. And it's a lot of fun to put together. It's like a little mini thing. And you don't want to do it any more than like 10 minutes, right? Because people will then be ready to jump into brainstorming. Now, on the question about brainstorming techniques in the Worship Design Studio, we've compiled all of these brainstorming techniques that I used in these podcasts where I had all these guest experts. And I have 20 of them, let's say. Little brainstorming techniques, because you're right. We don't want to just start from, okay, what are we going to do for the series, right? What are your ideas? There are a lot of ways to get people talking. Now, here's really important thing at the core to remember about this, and that is that some people will be extroverts and they will think out loud. So they'll immediately be ready to talk. Other people they think about it in their heads. They need time to hang back, and they need a different kind of way to bring their idea forward. So in these brainstorming parties, which I line out step by step in this book, Think Like a Filmmaker, there needs to be all group sharing, but there also needs to be sharing in one-on-one with each other. And I also like to put a newsprint on the walls for each one of the frames or Sunday services, so people can also graffiti ideas and have music playing, which doesn't require talking to anyone, which sometimes the introverts like. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about that right now. But again, there's tons of information both in the book, and if you're a member of the Worship Design Studio, we have training, articles, podcasts, webinars, and tons of stuff to learn every step of this process. Okay, what else, Jenna?
General question from Joanne. New to this vocabulary, how would you describe the synopsis? I'm assuming it's the worship/program on a given Sunday.
So a synopsis is a 2, 3, or 4 sentence description of the series or of the Sunday, depending on what you're writing it for. That is a synopsis. 2 to 3 sentences that describe. So right now on the screen, I have an example of a synopsis for Roll Down Justice for that series. So it's literally a paragraph. I also you'll see on each one of those, I have a little, what I call a scripture fragment. So let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That is the core scripture that I'm using as my inspiration for the entire series. So that's literally what a synopsis is. And in that article that we sent you, you can read more about exactly what are the things that I think about as I put those together. Jenna, any more before I'm itching to move on a little bit.
Yes, I just have one more question and comment that go together, so I'll share those at the same time. Alexis asked, does Dr. McFee have suggestions for lay-led congregations who rely on guest speakers who will speak on a theme, but not necessarily be part of planning with the worship team? Comment that Dave made, I think, to follow up with that is, I've done an entire summer series on the Psalms, but broke it into different sub-themes, praise, laments, petitions, etc., which meant that people could jump in at any point without feeling that they were at a disadvantage for not having been part of the preceding weeks.
Yes, that's awesome. I love that idea. Love that idea. And that's generally what you want to do with a longer series. But that's actually what you want to do with every series. Is a series is not sequels, right? So you don't have to have been at 1 to really get into number 2, to really get into number 3. That's why we're not using TV sequels or TV shows. It'd be more like Law and Order than Grey's Anatomy, right? So if you're fans of those shows, Grey's Anatomy, you kind of don't know what the personal stories are if you haven't been watching all along, and so you might not enjoy it as much if you jump in the middle. But Law and Order, the personal stories are not the forefront. It's the case that is the forefront, and so you can get into that. I know that's a weird metaphor, but that's what you kind of want to think about in your series, is that you want each one to stand on its own, even though it's connected. Now, on that first one, oh gosh, I'm remembering the first question. Jenna, help me. What was it? She's not listening to me anymore.
I'm listening. I just also can't remember. There were so many. Do you have a general idea of the length of sermon series?
No, we did that one. Okay, well, if you think of it later, let me know. Okay. I shouldn't go on so long about one. I forgot the first one. All right. So here we go. Let's move on to the next subject, which is our third article, which I sent you, was about my design terminology called anchor, frame, and thread. So those of you who are new to the terminology, these are 3 design terms that really help create a deep structure that helps congregational participation, it helps the design process, and it helps with creating that safe container in which to have a deeply spiritual experience. So let me go through these. Anchor image is a metaphor in the series that gives it its symbolic focus. So it functions somewhat like a logo. So your anchor image might even become part of your logo, right? So Gifts of the Dark Wood, obviously the dark wood is the anchor image. It is the metaphor. But what I might want to get even more specific about is a path through the dark wood, right? We're on the path. So I might look for images that had a path going through the woods. And believe me, you can find lots of them. This is the good thing. But an anchor image is really going to help do what it says. It's going to anchor us throughout the series and create some continuity. All right, so let's take a look at this term called metaphoraging. This is my term for who we are as humans. We are symbol makers. We love metaphor. We forage for metaphors. It's just part of who we are. It is natural to our brains. Our brains are constantly saying, what is this thing? How is this thing like this thing? Right? So this is part of our skill set. We can do this. So that's what you're doing. That's what you're exercising when you do, when you find an anchor image. And an anchor image is one of the first things, besides the series synopsis, that I do in the design process. So symbols are like electric transformers. Now, an electric transformer takes this huge amount of electricity that's coming in over the big wires that would blow our houses up if it came in directly like that. And it puts it in the box and it transforms it into an amount of electricity that we can actually use. So symbols work similarly. They allow us to grasp ineffable realities. In other words, huge theological concepts like being uncertain or being lost, right? Connected to a path through a dark wood. That helps us get a really concrete image of what we're talking about. Helps us to grasp these big concepts through concrete means. All right, so let's get some examples. So the Gift of the Dark Wood series, our anchor image is the woods, is a path, right? So in our in our logo, in our visual installation, what we suggest are earth tones and sticks that, people who have done this series have gone out in their back 40 and gotten tons of bare branches, brought them in. You can see in this picture that we suggested that people put these bare branches in a vase and then put a light underneath so that it makes shadows on the walls. Go to our Worship Design Studio Facebook page and look in our albums. We have pictures of what churches who have used these series have done with their visual installations, and you will just be amazed at how the same concept got done in very different ways. Very cool. Now, the picture of the walking stick is from a different series that I did once for Lent, but you could certainly use a walking stick as a symbol, as an anchor image for the Gifts of the Dark Woods series. Something that it evokes being on a path, wandering in the woods. So that's an anchor image. For Roll Down Justice, the waterfall. Let justice flow like waters, right? So a waterfall was our anchor image. I'm going to tell you in just a little bit when we talk about threads, how people used these strips of blue cloth, you can see in these pictures here, that created a waterfall that got longer and longer and longer every week. So justice was rolling down like waters, longer and longer every week. So that was the anchor image for that one. For our Listen series, we really, listening, that's kind of a concept that's hard to make tangible. So how do we do that? Well, practices, right? Practices are what make listening possible. Practices like praying, like meditating on scripture, like lighting candles, like ringing a bell, like touching water. So the practices themselves become the anchor, but visually what we're suggesting is that you learn the floral art of ikebana. It's a Japanese art form for arranging flowers. It's very simple, very sparse, and what it does is it honors the space between things as much as the things themselves. Hello, can you say listen? Right? It's creating space. And so that in and of itself will be an anchor image because it will help to symbolize what we're talking about. Now in our logo, when you see that, you'll see there's a cup of coffee and a Bible sitting on a pier overlooking the water. And the reason why I chose this picture as the logo is because it evokes that time of slowing down. And maybe it's just me, but a coffee cup can immediately, and sitting by water can immediately give me that sense of, I'm going to take time out, right? And the Bible is there because I'm going to take more time digging into my relationship with God than I normally do in Lent. Okay, so that's anchor image. Now, when I get my synopsis written, my 2 to 3 sentence description of the series, and my anchor image or things that's going to help symbolize the main message, I'm going to create what I call an inspiration page for my worship team. And this is going to help them get into it. So the inspiration page is something that I would have available for everybody at that brainstorming party. Okay, so that's anchor. Now let's look at frames. Frames are the containers for the material in the series. In other words, one frame equals one worship experience. Right now, I don't call them Sundays because not everybody worships on Sunday. Some people worship on Saturday or Wednesday or what have you. And within one series, you might have 6 Sundays, but you will also have maybe an Ash Wednesday service and 1 or 2 Holy Week services. So in that series, I would have that many frames, right? So I call them frames. What are the different, like we're making an art exhibit. Picasso had his blue period, and every one of the exhibit would be of Picasso's blue paintings. They all have that overarching sense of blue, but each one is different, right? So that's kind of the metaphor in using this term frame. So it is each of the worship series. Now, the next thing that I do is I come up with titles for each one of my frames. When you watch that trailer for the Listen series after this webinar, you're going to see the slide that I have up. And these are each of the titles for the 6 Sundays in Lent. Finding your cave, listening spaces. Finding your breath, listening to our bodies. Finding a word, listening to the text. Finding your power, listening for healing. Finding your mystic, listening beyond the voices inside your head. Finding your purpose, listening to your heart. Now you see I'm using a little device, a little literary device here of repeating these words in each one of those titles. And I will often do that kind of thing. It gives us a sense of it all holding together. That's not always true. Sometimes the titles are all different things, but oftentimes I will use this literary device. And certainly in the Listen series, finding and listening, that's what it's all about, discovery and getting quiet, right? There's that cell phone buzz, trying to find that phone. So I made my titles. Now, this is different for those of you who have never studied with me before. This is like how you would title your sermon, but you're not going to title your sermon, you're titling the service, the frame. Because what I want folks to begin to see is that the whole of worship is the message, not just a bunch of other stuff and then the sermon, right? So we're going to title the whole service. So your bulletin would have the title of the series and it would have the title of that week on it. And that would apply to everything in the service, including your sermon. I rarely will use a different sermon title than the worship title. So this is why I call it a worship series, not a sermon series. Okay, that's on purpose, because your musicians, your visual artists, your media artists, your dramatic artists, all of those folks will tell you that they feel called to proclaim the word, and they are. All of those art forms do. So that's the next thing I do is I make titles for all of my frames. Okay, so the next thing I would do then as well is to write a synopsis for every one of those frames. So I would, and you can, when you go to these 3 series that I'm using as my examples, when you go to their pages, you will find a link in each one of those pages to go and look at the synopses for each one of these series. And it will show you my 2 to 3 sentence synopsis for every one of the frames besides the title. You're going to get a really good idea about what that looks like. Now, this is golden for working with a team. Because again, those who are helping you choose music, those are helping you to create visuals, those are helping you create the visuals on the media. All of these things, people will know exactly where we're going every Sunday. Therefore, it cuts down on the amount of frustration or confusion about what we're doing. And it helps people have more fun, more ease, more excitement about the work of designing worship. And that is my main goal in life. Because I don't know, I'm a little bit of a geek in this area, but I find great joy and spiritual depth in not only leading the worship, but designing the worship. And I want you to do that as well. Okay, so we are going to next week see how each one of these synopses for each one of the frames actually gets used in the order of worship in what I call a threshold moment. But that's for next week, so you're going to have to hang on to that one. Finally, the last thing, thread. Now, a thread item are those things that repeat in every service of a series. Okay, so they're going to give our series continuity. It's going to help us to go deeper and deeper into that theme every week. So let me give you some examples because you can do this in many different art forms. For example, in our Listen series for Lent this year, we use this song by Chuck Bell and I called Come and Rest, Come and Listen, right? And that is going to be our theme song. So at the beginning of worship, this little refrain gets sung, and then the music keeps going underneath. We're going to hear the synopsis of the service. We're going to get more into depth with this next week. But then there is a time where we go into silence, and that silence is going to be punctuated before and after with this percussion sound effect kind of thing. Now I've got a picture up here of a guy using a handbell and a dowel rod, a wooden dowel, to actually create a singing bowl kind of effect. So you could use an actual singing bowl, you could use a handbell, you can use a rain stick, you can use rattles, you can use bells and chimes. but it's going to be done randomly with space in between that gives us that feel of listening. And I suggest that it's surround sound, because then it's that idea of perking up your senses, your alertness to all around you. Yeah, so it's part of that theme. So that's a thread. So that would be repeated every week, right? Another cool thing about a thread is that you come to worship and you get so excited about what you've experienced. Oh my gosh, that was so cool. And you want to invite people to come, or you think, oh, I wish so-and-so was here. Well, the great thing with a thread item through a whole season is that next week it's going to happen again. So you invite people. It's a great evangelism tool to help your folks invite other people. Okay, so in the Listen series as well, we have those prayer stations and a song that will get us into those prayer stations, which gets repeated every week. And the stations repeat every week so that we get to go deeper and deeper and deeper into those. So visuals can be a thread item, right? Now, in Gifts of the Dark Wood, one of my favorite thread items in that series is Mark Burrows, my children's expert in the worship design studio, created scripts for the children's time. And every week there's a backpack, and the backpack has something different in it, but the backpack is the same. So you create this anticipation by the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth week. The kids come up, they know there's going to be a backpack. They also go on a journey in the sanctuary and they find something along the path, right? So you see how this is creating a way for those who include children, who lead that children's time, of having a structure, a deep structure in which the children get to experience the theme in an active and therefore memorable way. So a thread can also be a way of doing something that repeats from frame to frame. A thread item can also be verbal, right? So in Gifts of the Dark Wood, there's a litany of confession in it. And I am a big fan of repeating the same people's response within a litany, but also then from week to week. So in this litany of confession, the leader says, "For filling up our lives with little room for you." And the people respond, "Forgive and restore us, O God." Leader, "For worry that outlasts trust." The people say, "Forgive and restore us, O God." The leader says, "For choosing being right over being in relationship." The people say, "Forgive and restore us, O God." So you see there's this rhythm, this repetition. And because the leader parts will be different every week that have to do with the theme of the week, but the people's response, "Forgive and restore us, O God," is going to be a repetition from week to week. What this means is that we get to go deeper without having so much cognitive responsibility in that moment, right? It's that repetition. It also means that we can be more multi-generational, because guess what? After a couple of repeats of that, even the youngest among us, verbally, once they're verbal, can repeat that over and over again. They may not understand what confession is or what they're doing, or it doesn't matter, but just being part of that repetition and hearing the body being part of that repetition is powerful, my friends. Okay, so a thread can also be verbal. Now, it can be visual. Now, here is what I was talking about earlier that was so cool. So in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see a picture from our document that we send out with all of these fully scripted series that have how-tos about our visual threads that we're suggesting. So I wrote on some of these blue pieces of cloth, because every week people write on them, something on them, and then they give them, and then the visual team adds those things to the waterfall. So it is congregational participation in a symbol, and then it gets added to the overall visual. And the reports back were that people just loved this, plus it looked really cool. And so you can see in the other pictures on this slide that people ended up doing that in their sanctuary in very different ways, but the same concept applied. And this is just really, really a powerful thing. And another way that a visual plus a ritual action can be a thread and create something wonderful. In the Listen series, one of the things I'm really excited about is that I have a how-to video of how to create a watercolor booklet that has 8 pages in it, and your worship team or your youth group or your it's so easy to do that you can do preparation from now until Lent of making a booklet for everybody. And part of the praying time is these will be scattered in the pews, in the seats. And during prayer time, people can journal in these on a page. Then they leave it, and in between Sundays, you take those and you put them in different pews and chairs, because people sit in the same place, right? You put them in different so that the next week during that prayer time, what we call Appointment with God in that series, you can actually not only write something, but you can read what others have written. So it's about sharing our wisdom, but that becomes a thread item. That becomes a way of something that repeats every week, but then is also congregational participation. Oh, I just love this stuff. I hope you do too. Friends, we are at the end of our time together. Next week, we're going to look at spiritual depth, the role that design and leading plays in going deep. And Lent is a perfect time to really focus on this. Now, let me say, I promised you at the end of this time that I would let you know that we have a special promotion going, 20% off these a la carte series. If you're not a member of the Worship Design Studio, they are $99, but you're going to get it for $79 because 20% or $20, right, of $100. And you use this promo code DEEP, and it's all caps, to get that. It's only going to be, that promo code is only going to be live from now until next week, until after our webinar next week. So you have this 1 week to get this promo code thank you gift for being on these webinars. And so you go to worshipdesignstudio.com/gifts for Gifts of the Dark Wood, /Roll Down Justice for that one, and /listen for this year's Listen series. Use that promo code at checkout to get that. Now, all of you who are part of the Worship Design Studio, you get all of these, everything we do and produce for free. So friends, if you want to go ahead, when you check out, this is a picture of the shopping cart. Let's say you're getting Listen. You use the promo code, that turns to $79. Then you can also add to your cart a full year subscription to the Worship Design Studio for $100 off, right? So what that means is that you're not only going to get one of these series, but you're going to get all of our series, including the fully scripted ones. So basically you've already paid for your subscription in the value you get back, because you don't have to pay for these one at a time. Okay. And also the Worship Design Studio has tons of training. If this terminology is new to you, if having a better structure for designing worship, for planning ahead, planning together, working with a team, there are training videos to actually train your team on there. If you have an HGTV addict who's part of your church but has never done visuals for the sanctuary before, just send them the link to the webinar from the Worship Design Studio and they can get trained by yours truly. That's partly what I do. I become part of your worship team, and I love that. I love that. So join our hundreds of churches who are part of the Worship Design Studio, and I'm just very excited to be in this ministry, to be resourcing you, because ultimately what it means is that I get to help you be on a deeply spiritual journey with your congregation. I get to lessen your stress, because Sunday comes around every week relentlessly. And because our congregations worship deeply, we can make a bigger difference in this world as church, as we grow together. And that's the bottom line, right? So friends, next week we will be doing same time, same place, same format. Just come on and look for an email following. It'll be tomorrow or the next day with this recording. So if you have people on your worship team that you wish could see this, could jump on board and get up to speed with some of these ideas, then send it right to them. Have them watch it so that you can talk together about it. So my friends, it's great to be with you. I hope you've enjoyed today. I hope you're excited about getting ready for Lent. I hope that I can resource you in whatever ways that you need, from helping you with the process to do your own design from scratch, or using one of ours to help you get a sense of what it means to worship in a deeply spiritual, sensory-rich, congregational participation, deeply symbolic way. So thanks so much for being on, and I will see you next week. Ciao for now. Bye-bye.